Philosopher John Locke believed that all Americans deserve the fundamental rights to life, liberty, and their property. Sound familiar? This same phrase was used by Thomas Jefferson when writing the Declaration of Independence, with one key change. Jefferson substituted property with the pursuit of happiness, as he believed that Americans should not only have the rights to their property, but also a more broad right to self-improvement and fulfillment. While the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is often parroted by those advocating for the existence of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps American dream, somewhere along the way, it seems we forgot about the property part. My name is Christina Machado. I'm turning 19 next month, and I want to buy a house one day. As a computer science major at the University of Minnesota, I've never really been interested in finance or economics, but what I am interested in is not being homeless once I graduate. Housing is quite literally one of our most basic needs, right up there with food and water. There's a reason we call our earliest ancestors cavemen, as they needed to live in those caves to brave the elements, the hottest days and the coldest nights. As Americans, we like to blame other people for problems that are clearly systemic. Don't have a house? Why don't you save your money better so you can get one in the future? Don't have enough money to get your basic needs met? Why don't you get a better job that pays enough to support you and your family? Can't get a job because you don't have a permanent address and couldn't afford to look professional at your interview? Why don't you just get a house? The lack of affordable housing is something that affects us all. The vast majority of Americans are only one paycheck away from getting evicted and ending up out on the streets. Housing should be a right for everyone, but right now, it's only a luxury for the few. But how did we get here? I wanted to examine one popular facet of the real estate market that has been on the rise since the 2008 housing crisis: investments in real estate. Over the past decades, we have turned housing from a space that provides shelter, comfort, and a sense of security and belonging into a commodity to be traded on the market and tossed around like a luxury handbag. But can this type of investment help everyday Americans get out of their financial slumps? Or is it truly just an activity for the uber wealthy? To start, let's take a step back and examine what real estate investing really is. A quick Google search takes me to an Investopedia article by Barclay Palmer. According to this article, there are 3 main ways to get income from investing in real estate. The first is rental income, money you get from people paying to rent your property. The second is appreciation, which happens when the value of your property goes up over time due to renovations of the property or outside factors like the development of the neighborhood around your property. The third is profits generated by property-dependent business activity. For example, if you are renting out a section of your apartment building to a mother who wants to run a fitness class in that space, or renting out your lakeside lawn space for a photographer. Investors can benefit from passive income, stable cash flow, tax advantages, diversification, and market leverage. There's also a way to invest in real estate without having to own or operate the property yourself by investing in a real estate investment trust, or REIT. This is much more similar to investing in stocks or bonds, where you invest in a private equity company that gives you a share of a property. All in all, it seems that investing in real estate can actually be a great opportunity to make money on the side without having to do all that much work. I can totally do this with my own home that I'm going to buy one day, right? Well, here's the kicker. Even this Investopedia article agrees that using one's primary residence as a real estate investment doesn't really work because you are using it as a home. A primary residence lacks liquidity, meaning you can't just take a piece of your house and sell it off once the property values go up. Unless you are planning on flipping each house you live in and moving every 2 to 3 years, you can't really use your own home as a good investment. And yet, many Americans believe that one way or another they can use their house as an investment to make money in the future. According to an article by Adam Millsap titled "Treating Housing as an Investment is a Bad Idea for Homeowners and Hurts the Economy" from Forbes, the general public believes that real estate is actually a better investment than traditional stocks. This is a dangerous notion, as for the majority of Americans, equity in homes accounts for over 1/3 of their net worth. This means that if housing values decline in their area, anyone who has their wealth tied up in their house will have their net worth pulled down too. The issue with this is, everyday Americans have almost no control over the economy of the environment they live in. You buy a house because it's close to work, or it's in a good school district, or it was the cheapest place you could find when you needed to move quickly. Unfortunately, this reality does not stop Americans from trying to control the economy. If I am trying to use my own house as an investment, I have one goal in mind: raise the value of my property. And what is the simplest way to raise the value of my property? It all goes back to supply and demand. If I can find a way to restrict the amount of houses getting built in my area, then my house will be one of the few in a valuable neighborhood. And as more people want to live here, my property value will increase as supply goes down and demand increases. The issue with this is that if my property value goes up, so will my property taxes. Property taxes were meant to create a balancing act for homeowners. We want our property values to rise, but if they get too high, then property taxes get out of control. So to lower the taxes, we allow new housing to be built to lower our property values so our taxes get back in check. But what if I didn't have to pay those high property taxes? That is what California's Proposition 13 offers, a cap of property taxes. Now that there's a cap on how high my property taxes can go, it doesn't matter how high my property values rise. I don't ever have to let someone build a house near my house again because my taxes will never be higher than a certain amount. All benefits and no costs. For me. For everyone else, that's a different story. There are many similar policies across the country, just like California's Proposition 13, which encourages homeowners to restrict development in their neighborhoods with the notion that when it's time for them to sell, they'll get the most bang for their buck. But these policies still don't guarantee returns. Say I've lived in my house for 50 years. I've restricted development, and now my property is worth millions. I'm about to retire and sell my house. When 3 schools close down due to a lack of teachers, crime skyrockets due to the latest and greatest in gun deregulation, and a wildfire sweeps through my neighborhood, knocking down 70% of the nearby housing. My house is fine, but nobody wants to live here anymore. Suddenly, all that work I did restricting development was for nothing, and the lack of affordable housing probably caused 2 out of the 3 of those problems. I have never invested in anything else, and I will not be able to retire. Can you see how this doesn't really work for the average American? There are very few ways to actually profit off of your own house, and the main way is to screw over your fellow American and make the housing problem worse. You, one American, cannot control the entire housing market to make the house you're going to live in for the next 50 years a good investment. So, who really are the people benefiting from this real estate investment boom? Real estate investment trusts. I briefly mentioned REITs earlier as one of the ways that an everyday American can get in on the profits generated by private equity firms that will own and operate an investment property for you. But what is a private equity firm and who owns them? A private equity firm is a company that goes around America buying up any and all available properties, from single-family homes to apartment complexes and high-rises. These companies are owned by the wealthiest among us, the billionaire class. In an article by Chuck Collins from inequality.org, titled How Billionaire Investors Are Disrupting the U.S. Housing Market, Collins describes how billionaires use real estate as a, quote, safety deposit box, parking their wealth in multifamily units, single-family homes, and mobile home parks that are all owned and operated by these private equity firms. These billionaires are incentivized to drive up land and housing costs by treating housing like a commodity, not a necessity for life. Because of this, there are 16 million vacant homes nationwide being used as investment vehicles instead of a place for a family to live comfortably. That is 28 vacant homes for every person currently unhoused in the United States. These companies turn permanent housing into short-term rentals to cash in on tourism, preventing local residents from living in their neighborhoods. This, quote, hyper-gentrification is not the result of one guy owning 1 or 2 properties, but rather the rise of something more sinister, the corporate landlord. The corporate landlord is a term I discovered when researching further into one type of REIT, the Single-Family Rental Housing Real Estate Investment Trust, or SFR REIT. An article in the Journal of Urban Affairs titled The Financialization of Single-Family Rental Housing, an examination of real estate investment trust ownership of single-family houses in the Atlanta metropolitan area by Suzanne L. Charles, discusses the history of SFR REITs and demonstrates how the 4 biggest SFR REITs affect the greater Atlanta metropolitan area and most likely other major metropolitan areas in the U.S. SFR REITs became prominent in the wake of the 2008 housing crisis, as private equity firms bought up heavily discounted, distressed single-family housing, mostly in low-income communities of color. Since 2008, these SFR REITs have continued their ownership in these areas, expanding to newly built houses surrounding their original communities. Corporate landlords are a product of capitalism, such that they are made as a vehicle for endless profit seeking, regardless of the mental and physical toll their actions take on real people. SFR REITs are more likely to raise rents to pay out their stakeholders, more likely to evict tenants, and overall more unforgiving to the communities that they have taken over. While SFR REITs only own a small percentage of the total amount of single-family homes in the United States, that percentage is growing every day, and the markets only encourage this kind of behavior. Corporate landlords aren't the only ones to blame for the shortage of affordable housing. In an article from the New Labor Forum by Samuel Stein titled "The Housing Crisis and the Rise of the Real Estate State," we are introduced to a new culprit: city planners. Stein echoes many of the same concerns raised by Collins, that corporations and billionaires are using real estate to park their wealth, but goes further to introduce the concept of the, quote, real estate state, in which real estate capital shapes our cities, politics, and our lives. In an ideal world, city planners would shape the city to fit the needs of those who already live there and those who are yet to come. They would create an affordable environment where inhabitants could live, work, and thrive. Instead, under the real estate state, these planners are beholden to the endless profit seeking of our capitalist society. While planners are meant to have continuous values no matter the current administration, these planners are still beholden to politicians and their appointees, which often come with an agenda to favor the richest among us. And what is the result of this real estate state? Quote, there is not a single county in the country where a full-time minimum wage worker can afford the average 2-bedroom apartment. I think it's fair to say that we clearly have a housing crisis in this country. And even fairer to say that corporations and billionaires treating housing like a commodity instead of a basic necessity has drastically harmed local communities and cities. But is real estate investing the problem? Or is it, and the affordable housing crisis, just a symptom of a larger systemic disease sweeping the nation? To figure this out, I looked into an article by Mary Cleveland for the American Journal of Economics and Sociology titled Homelessness and Inequality. Cleveland understands that a big reason for homelessness is the lack of affordable housing, but believes that there is a larger problem at hand, which is the true reason for homelessness. Many solutions offered by politicians when addressing the homelessness crisis, quote, amount to treating symptoms. They do not address the larger problem that, due to growing inequality, a substantial portion of U.S. residents are housing insecure in that they cannot easily afford minimal housing. Cleveland believes that in order to solve this crisis in housing, we must first solve the problem of wealth inequality and close the gap between the poorest among us and the top 1%. Cleveland's understanding of the crisis comes from a more modern version of classical economic theory. The greater the inequality of wealth, the greater the inequality of both earned and unearned income. Basically, as the richest people continue to get richer and the poorest continue to get poorer, more and more people won't be able to afford the most basic necessities, including housing. Cleveland's theories don't necessarily contradict with what has been said by other scholars and researchers on this matter. Collins, in his article, How Billionaire Investors Are Disrupting the U.S. Housing Market, brings up similar issues. He discusses how the wealthiest among us are buying up all the property and using it to get cash fast with short-term rentals rather than it being used to permanently house local residents. While this idea doesn't explicitly relate to Cleveland's theory, we can see that the reason why the wealthiest among us even have the opportunity to buy up all the properties is because there is no competition. Billionaires are so much more wealthy than the average American that there is simply no chance for anyone else to compete for the property. If everyone was a billionaire, or more realistically, if everyone made $80K a year, the competition for these properties would be more fair. A similar connection can be made with points brought up in Stein's article, The Housing Crisis and the Rise of the Real Estate State. The main bad actors in Stein's article are the city planners that capitulate to the politicians and their appointees, serving their agendas, which are influenced by the billionaire donors and corporate lobbyists, instead of an agenda that focuses on helping the actual residents in need of good city planning. Again, this idea doesn't explicitly relate to Cleveland's theory, but we can take a closer look and realize that these planners are beholden to the endless profit-seeking of our capitalist society. And where are the profits? With the billionaires. Now, if there were no billionaires, no uber-wealthy corporations controlling our politics, these planners could start planning for what really matters. Cities that are affordable, industrial, and serve the interests of the people. Cleveland is right. Both Collins' and Stein's articles focus on small parts of a much larger issue. While we can create specific solutions for housing and homelessness, nothing will truly solve the housing crisis in the United States unless we look at the bigger picture, the giant wealth inequality from the poorest among us to the top 1%. Cleveland brings up this point herself when she states, quote, "The only way to enable poor residents to bid successfully for more and better housing is to reduce richer residents' abilities to bid for that housing." If we create a more equal playing field by lessening the wealth inequality gap, we can create more fair markets for housing, and solutions that target the creation of affordable housing will actually mean something, other than just more property for the corporate landlords to grab. So it seems that there are a lot of problems in the US regarding this housing crisis. But what exactly are the solutions? There are a lot of ways that we can target the surface problems. According to Collins, we should, quote, "expand the social housing sector of community-controlled or publicly owned housing that is outside the speculative market, such as quality public housing and other forms of non-profit-owned housing like community land trusts or resident cooperatives." Stein echoes this belief, advocating for, quote, "expanding rent controls and rebuilding public housing with full funding and competent and democratic management." Stein also wants to adopt policies that will transfer private land to public or collective ownership if property owners fail to pay taxes, or under, quote, "right of first refusal" policies to allow cities to have the first pass of properties for sale. Cleveland believes that we should tax land values instead of taxing what is actually on the property. Quote, "By shifting their tax system more onto land values, cities can both reduce local inequality and encourage construction of new environmentally friendly housing at higher density." And who would pay for all these new policies and initiatives? Collins argues that, quote, "new investment in social housing should come from taxing billionaires, levying mansion taxes, and regulating harmful practices." And Cleveland agrees, quote, "reducing wealth inequality requires national tax reform and a return to vigorous antitrust enforcement." But are these solutions even possible under our current capitalist system? For so long, Americans have lived disillusioned by the lie of meritocracy, that if I become the best of the best, work hard enough to master my craft, that I will be rewarded with wealth, and that all those who have become billionaires have done so because they worked hard too, not because of their exploitation of the working class or their wealthy ancestors. How can we change the minds of policymakers, legislators, and city planners if we still believe that the current system is fair and just? First, I think it's important to note that more and more people are waking up to the reality of the housing crisis. According to a study by Data for Progress, shared by Joe Radosevich and Doug Turner for Center American Progress, 76% of all likely voters agree that, quote, "the affordability of housing is getting worse in their communities," and 79% believe it is getting worse nationally. 78% of all likely voters believe, quote, "the cost of living is getting worse in their communities," and 79% believe it is getting worse nationally. 77% of all likely voters agree with the statement that, quote, "America has a housing shortage and we need more homes and rentals." And 60% of all likely voters believe that, quote, "private equity firms and big investors are buying up too many homes to profit from as rentals," and rank it as a, quote, "serious problem." Over 70% of all likely voters either strongly or somewhat support government policies like, quote, "preventing large corporate landlords from using algorithms and technologies that limit competition and lead to price gouging in the housing market," quote, "ending federal tax breaks that allow wealthy investors to buy up many homes at once to use for rentals," and, quote, "providing funding for local communities to build and maintain permanent affordable housing for American workers like firefighters, teachers, and their families." And 64% of all likely voters agree with the statement that, quote, "the government should have a role in the housing market. Housing is a basic necessity, and the private market is unable to address many Americans' affordability concerns." The housing crisis and rising wealth inequality has gone too far, and it's clear that many Americans are ready for a change. But when we look to the government for help, there seems to be even bigger issues on our hands. Fair and free elections, the disenfranchisement of voters, gerrymandered districts, the two-party system, the electoral college, and our current administration that seems to have a complete disregard for what is legal and constitutional, even in the eyes of our packed conservative Supreme Court. How can we push for policy reforms if no one is there to listen? As a young person, it's easy to slip into a state of depressed nihilism. While our country descends into fascism, how can I, one young woman talking to herself in her dorm room in the middle of the night ever hope to create a real change in our country that will allow me the opportunity to one day own my own house? Well, it can't just be me. It has to be all of us. Quote, "The real estate state is a historical and political construct. It was formed by historical factors, and it can be unmade by political movements." Stein here is giving some crucial advice. The real estate state hasn't existed forever. It was the product of capitalism, endless profit seeking, and the exploitation of the working class. To undo it, we have to band together and fight for our right to housing, our right to a comfortable life, our right to humanity. Stein offers some more radical solutions in their article: mass rent strikes, eviction blockades, and anti-foreclosure occupations, which all target landlords at the crucial point where people hand over their hard-earned pay. In many cities, working-class tenants compose a larger fraction of the population than almost any other demographic. By banding together, we could create an unbeatable bloc, and that's when landlords and politicians would have to listen. I wish I could end this video with recommendations of organizations already making efforts to achieve these goals, of other creators that are more knowledgeable about this topic than me, and of ways you could immediately jump into action to fight against the real estate state and the rising wealth inequality in America. But to be honest, I haven't looked into that stuff myself. I started this journey simply interested in how real estate investing affects the housing market and whether it can actually benefit everyday Americans. In the end, I have discovered that the real problem is so much deeper and requires true systemic change on the local, state, and federal levels. Organizing social movements and instilling class consciousness kind of falls outside the scope of my research. For this video, having fallen down this rabbit hole, I am more interested than ever to research the real roots of this problem and discover the ways I can help fight the institutions that have gotten us in this position. So, will I be able to buy a house one day? I don't know, but I am damn well going to fight for it, and you should too.